That cabin and the strip of shoreline under it belong to this association now. And you will sign the surrender form by Friday, or we will take it through the lien." The woman who said that was Brenda Calloway, president of the Pinecrest Shores Homeowners Association for 9 years. And she said it standing on my own dock with a clipboard pressed to her chest like a shield. The cabin she was talking about was the one my wife and I built board by board on 2.5 acres of lakefront we bought outright in 1991. My wife had been gone 4 years by then. My daughter was 16 and standing in the kitchen window behind me, watching a stranger in a magenta blazer tell her father to hand over the only place her mother's hands had ever touched the wood. What Brenda did not know, what she never once bothered to check in the 18 months she spent trying to take my shoreline, was that I spent 31 years working in the county recorder's office, and that I had read more deeds, plats, and easements than she had read emails. I knew exactly what was filed against my parcel and what was not. I knew the boundary better than the surveyor who set the pins. And I had a folder. So let me ask you something before I tell you the rest. If a woman with no authority over your land stood on the dock you built and told you to surrender it by Friday, would you have argued with her? Or would you have started writing everything down? My name is Wade Harmon. I was 63 the year this began. I worked 3 decades as a records examiner, and the last 6 of those as the senior deputy recorder for the county, which is a long way of saying I spent my whole career making sure that what a piece of paper claimed matched what the ground actually held. People think a recorder's office is a sleepy place full of dust and rubber stamps. It is not. It is where every lie a person ever tries to tell about a piece of land eventually has to walk up to a counter and be measured against what is already written down. I sat at that counter for 31 years. I watched developers try to record plats over easements they pretended not to see. I watched heirs forge a signature on a quitclaim and lose everything when the notary log did not match. I learned, slowly and then all at once, that the ground keeps its own memory, and that memory is the chain of recorded instruments, and that a man who reads the chain to the end is very hard to rob. I retired the spring after my wife Carol died, and I came up to the cabin to do the only thing that still made sense, which was to fix the dock she always wanted rebuilt and to raise our daughter Nina in the quiet she deserved. The retirement was not a decision so much as a tide going out. I came home one day to a house that did not have Carol in it, and I could not sit in the county seat another season pulling other people's deeds while my own land sat empty 4 hours north. So I sold the house in town, packed the truck, and brought Nina up to the lake to finish growing up where her mother had been happiest. I did not come up here to fight anybody. I came up here to sand a dock and let a girl heal in the pines. The parcel sat at the north end of Cedar Lake, a long, narrow body of water ringed mostly by old family cabins, and on the south end by a newer gated subdivision called Pinecrest Shores. Carol and I had bought our 2.5 acres from a rancher named Olson in 1991, back before the subdivision existed, back when the only thing at the south end was a hayfield and a leaning barn. I remember the day we drove up to look at it. Carol got out of the truck before I had it in park and walked straight down to the water and stood there with her hands on her hips and did not say anything for a full minute. And then she turned around and said, "This is the one, Wade. Do not let it go." We did not have the money. We made the money happen. We built the cabin over 3 summers, the 2 of us and whatever friends we could feed. And Carol set every window herself because she said I would put them in crooked. And she was right, I would have. The deed we signed carried something the later lots never got. It carried a recorded access and use easement along the full northern shoreline, granted to our parcel by the original Lakeshore Plat in 1954, decades before anyone dreamed of a homeowners association. I did not find that easement by luck. I found it because Carol made me read the deed all the way to the end, at the closing table. The back pages, the legal description, the exceptions, while the seller's agent drummed his fingers and wanted us to sign. On the third back page, in the dense language nobody reads, was the easement. And I read it twice and felt the small, electric thing I always felt at the counter when a document said more than the people in the room knew it said. That easement was the spine of everything that came after. And I had a certified copy of it in a manila folder in the bottom drawer of my desk before Brenda Calloway ever learned my name. The subdivision went in around 2004. Pinecrest Shores. Nice homes, paved lanes, a clubhouse, a board, and a set of covenants that applied to the lots inside the subdivision and to absolutely nothing outside it. My cabin was not inside it. My cabin had never been platted into it. We were a separate, older parcel with our own legal description, our own tax lot number, and our own recorded easement. And for years that distinction sat quiet and unbothered, the way a good fence sits when no one is leaning on it. Then Brenda became president, and her husband bought the old Olson hayfield. His name was Greg Calloway, and he ran a development outfit out of the county seat. He had a plan for the South Shore, and the plan was a resort. 40 units, a marina, a restaurant on pilings out over the water, and a private beach club. I learned all of this later, in pieces, the way you learn the shape of a thing in the dark, by bumping into it. The short version is this. To build the marina the way Greg wanted it, he needed shoreline frontage on the north end, the deep water end, the end where my cabin sat. And the cleanest way to get my shoreline without paying me for it was to convince everyone, including me, that it already belonged to the association. The first letter came on a Tuesday in March. It was printed on Pinecrest Shores letterhead, and it informed me that my dock was in violation of community aesthetic standards, and that I would be assessed a fine of $100 per day until it was brought into compliance. I read it twice. Then I did what I have done with every official paper that has ever crossed my hands. I dated it. I noted the time I received it. I photographed it. And I put it in a new folder labeled with the date. That was Incident 1. I want to be honest about something. My first instinct was not war. My first instinct was that someone had made an honest filing error, the kind I had corrected 1,000 times from the other side of the counter, where a wrong tax lot number or a misread plat could put a fine on the wrong parcel without any malice behind it. In 31 years, I had seen far more incompetence than villainy, so I gave Brenda Calloway the benefit of the doubt I would have given anyone. And I drove down to the clubhouse on a Thursday morning, and I asked, politely, to speak with the board about a mistake. Brenda met me in the clubhouse lobby in white kitten heels and that magenta blazer, with her sunglasses pushed up on her head, though it was overcast and cold. She did not invite me to sit. The lobby had a gas fireplace going and a wall of brass mailboxes and a framed aerial photo of the South Shore with the subdivision lots drawn in. I noticed the photo cut off well short of my parcel, which told me that on some level, somebody down there knew exactly where the community ended. Mr. Harmon, there's no mistake, she said. Your property falls within the natural boundary of our community, which makes it functionally part of our jurisdiction. The board has discretion over the entire lake frontage. I'd suggest you cooperate. My parcel isn't in your plat, I said. I can show you the legal description. It's a separate tax lot. It always has been. I don't need to see a description, she said. I know where our community begins and ends. That's the part I'd want to be sure of, I said, before I sent a man a fine. She tipped her head at me like I had said something quaint. There was a younger woman behind the front desk who looked up and then looked very deliberately back down at her screen. 2 residents by the mailboxes had stopped pretending not to listen. "The fines will continue until the dock is in compliance," Brenda said. "And the surrender of the frontage is not optional. This community has standards, and we have been more than patient with the previous owner's arrangements." There were no previous owners. Carol and I were the only owners that parcel had ever had since Olson. I did not correct her, though, because correcting her was not the point. The point was to find out what she believed and to write it down. That was the first time I heard her say it. Functionally part of our jurisdiction, and it would not be the last. I drove home. I wrote down every word she said while it was fresh, the date, the time, the place, the witnesses in the lobby. Incident 2. Nina asked me at dinner what the woman wanted, and I told her the truth. That a neighbor thought she owned something she did not, and that we were going to be patient and careful and write everything down. Nina, who was 16 and sharper than I deserved, said, "Like at your old job." I said yes, exactly like that. The fines started arriving weekly. Each one I dated, photographed, and filed. They came in the same cream envelopes with the Pinecrest Shores crest, and each one raised the number a little, and each one was wrong in the same fundamental way, which is that you cannot fine a man for failing to comply with rules that do not reach his land. By the end of April, there were 6 notices in the folder, and the claimed total was over $4,000, which I never paid and never intended to pay. Because you cannot owe a fine to an association you do not belong to. I want to be clear that I did not ignore them, which is different from not paying them. Ignoring a thing leaves you defenseless. I answered each one in writing, with a short dated letter stating that my parcel was not within the association's plat, and requesting that they produce any recorded instrument granting them jurisdiction. They never produced one. They just sent the next fine. Every unanswered request was another brick in a wall I was building quietly, one cream envelope at a time. The folder grew. I bought a second folder and then a third, and I labeled them by quarter the way I used to label case files. In May, they sent an inspector. He showed up on a Wednesday at 4 in the afternoon in a pickup with a magnetic sign on the door that said, Lake Region Code Enforcement, which is not a real agency, which I knew because I had spent 31 years knowing exactly which agencies were real. There is a county code office. There is a state shoreline program. There is no Lake Region Code Enforcement, and the sign was the kind you order online and slap on a door for the afternoon and peel off before you stop for gas. He was a heavy-set man in a polo shirt with a clipboard and a laminated badge on a lanyard. And the badge had a seal on it that did not match any agency I had ever filed a document for. He wanted to walk my shoreline and document violations. I stood at the top of my own steps with my coffee, and I told him he could photograph anything he liked from the public water, but he would not be setting foot on my parcel without a warrant or my permission. And he had neither. "Sir, I'm authorized to inspect lakefront structures in this district," he said. "What district issued the badge?" I asked him. He looked at the badge as if it might tell him. "The regional authority," he said. "There's no regional authority," I said. "There's a county office, and they don't drive trucks with magnets on the door. You can stand right there on the water. You set one boot on my steps, and we'll be having a different conversation with a different uniform." He left. He sat in the truck at the end of my lane for a few minutes first, on the phone, and I photographed that too. I had already started a camera on the boathouse by then, 2 of them actually, recording to a drive in the house, and a second drive I swapped out and kept in the truck, the same way I used to keep a working copy and a backup copy of every record at the office. I had the inspector on film, the fake sign on film, the badge on film. Incident 9. That night, I pulled the easement copy out of the bottom drawer and read it again at the kitchen table. Not because I doubted it, but because reading it steadied me the way some men are steadied by scripture. Here is what it said, in the plain language of 1954. The northern shoreline of Cedar Lake, the full run of it, adjacent to what was now my parcel, was burdened by a recorded easement for access and use. And the benefit of that easement ran to my tract, and to my tract alone. Not to the association, not to the South Shore. To me. Whoever wanted to build a marina that touched my frontage would have to come to my kitchen table and ask. And I had no intention of saying yes to Greg Calloway. The reason I did not simply mail Brenda a copy of the easement and end it that spring is the same reason a careful man does not show his hand to a cheat at the table. I had spent a career watching people try to paper over the truth. And I knew that the moment I revealed the document, the smart move on their side would be to manufacture a competing claim, a forged consent, a backdated agreement, a story about a verbal deal with Old Man Olson. Paper can be answered with more paper if you have time and no shame. So I held mine, and I let them keep building a case against themselves, and I counted. In June, the harassment moved to my customers, which surprised me, because I did not think I had customers. Nina and I had been selling firewood and a little cut lumber off the property for years, just enough to keep the chainsaw in gas. And word went around the South Shore that anyone buying from the Harmon place was buying from an illegal operation on association land. 2 longtime buyers called to tell me, embarrassed, that Brenda had cornered them at the clubhouse mailboxes and told them the wood was coming off contested ground and that purchases might be reported. One of them, a retired school teacher, apologized so many times I finally had to tell her it was all right, that she had done nothing wrong, that the only person doing anything wrong was the woman with the clipboard. The other one, a rancher named Pete Sorensen, did not get embarrassed. He got angry. He drove up my lane the same afternoon in a flatbed that smelled like hay and diesel, climbed out, and stood in my yard with his hat in his hand. "Wade, she stopped me by the mailboxes and told me your wood was stolen off the lake," he said. "I told her I'd been buying off you for 9 years, and the only thing stolen around here was her sense of proportion." I almost smiled. "I'm sorry she dragged you into it." "Don't be sorry. Be smart." He pointed his hat at the cabin. "You keeping track of all this?" "Every word," I said. "Dated." "Good." He put the hat back on. "You need a name on a piece of paper? You need somebody to stand up in a room and say what she said to me. You call me. I mean that. Try me." I wrote down what he told me that evening. The date, the words Brenda used, the time he arrived. Incident 14. And I underlined the part where Pete said, "Try me," because in my experience, the difference between a case that holds and a case that folds is whether one ordinary, stubborn, honest neighbor is willing to put his name down. I had a feeling Pete was going to be that neighbor. By July, I understood the shape of the thing in the dark. I drove to the county seat one morning, 90 minutes down the highway, and I walked into the building where I had worked for 31 years, and the woman at the counter, who had trained under me, raised her eyebrows and said, "Wade Harmon, I thought we got rid of you." I told her I needed to pull some public records, and she said, "You know where everything is better than I do. Go on back." So I did the thing I knew how to do better than anyone Brenda Calloway would ever hire. I pulled records. I pulled the development application Greg had filed for the South Shore Resort. And there, on the site plan, was the marina, and the marina extended north along the deep water frontage that was mine, drawn in clean architect's lines as if it were already his. I stood at the public terminal a long time looking at that drawing. They had even sketched in little boat slips along my shoreline. I pulled the financing documents that were public, the ones tied to the county's economic development incentive filing. 40 units, a projected build cost in the millions, and a hard construction start date that could not move, because the loan terms and the incentive both keyed to it. I printed every page. The same woman who had trained under me ran the certification stamp without being asked and slid the copies across the counter and said quietly, "Whatever this is, I hope you win it." That was the motive, finally, in daylight. It was never about my dock's aesthetics. It was about a man who had borrowed against a resort he could not legally build without shoreline he did not own, and a wife with a clipboard and a title who had been sent to take it from a grieving widower they assumed was too tired to fight. I made copies of everything, a working set and a backup set, the way Carol used to tease me for. I filed them. I told Nina only that I had found out why, and that we were close, and that she was not to be alone at the cabin with the gate open. She nodded, and she started locking the gate behind her without being asked. And she started keeping her phone charged and her thumb ready, because I had shown her once how to film steady, and she had not forgotten. In August, a sheriff's deputy came up the drive, and for the first time I was glad to see a uniform, because a deputy meant the dispute had finally entered a system I trusted. His name was Dale Whitman, and he was about 40, plain-spoken, clearly uncomfortable. He parked at the bottom of the steps and took off his hat before he came up, which is a small thing. But you learn to read a man by whether he takes off his hat. He told me the association had filed a formal trespass and nuisance complaint, and that, regardless of how he personally read it, he was required to follow up on a filed complaint. I told him I understood completely. I had spent my career on the other end of exactly that obligation, watching officers roll on filings that any fool could see were garbage. Because the system does not let you decide a complaint is garbage until you have looked. "I'm not here to take a side," Dale said. "But I'll tell you straight, complaints like this go nowhere unless someone can show a pattern, and they go very fast the other direction and the second somebody shows me a recorded document." "You got anything recorded?" "I do," I said. "When the time's right, you'll see it." He looked at me for a second, and I think he understood, because he did not push. He told me what he needed was a documented pattern of their conduct, that one incident was a dispute and a dozen was a case, and that if I ever had reason to call him, it had better be on his direct line and not the dispatch desk, where things got lost. I almost laughed. I walked him inside to my desk, and I showed him not the easement, not yet, but the folders. The dated notices in their plastic sleeves. The photographs with the date burned into the corner. The footage of the fake inspector and his magnet sign played back on the monitor. He went quiet, flipping pages, and the longer he flipped, the slower he went. "How many of these you got?" he asked. "Through this morning," I said. 31 separate incidents, everyone dated, timed, and photographed. He wrote that number in his own notebook. 31. He told me to keep doing exactly what I was doing, and to call him directly the next time anyone set foot on my land. Then he did something I have never forgotten. At the door, he put his hat back on, and he stopped, and he said, "My grandfather had a place on this lake, North End, before I was born. I know whose family built what up here, and I know your stretch wasn't ever part of that subdivision. You keep that folder close." Then he went down the steps and drove out, and he latched my gate behind him on his way, which told me everything I needed to know about which way Dale Whitman would turn when the facts came out. The escalation I'd been waiting for came in September, and it crossed every line at once. It was a Monday, a little after 7 in the morning. There was frost on the truck, and the lake was flat as glass, and the smell of bacon was in the kitchen. I was at the stove, and Nina was getting ready for school when I heard an engine that did not belong. A heavy diesel coming up the lane too fast. And then the sound I will not forget. The metal-on-metal bite of a chain being worked by bolt cutters. I went out onto the porch with my phone already recording, because that was the rule I had set for myself months before. Phone first, words second. 2 men I did not know were at my gate with bolt cutters and a length of new chain coiled over one shoulder. And behind them, on the lane, sat a flatbed with a small excavator strapped to it, the kind you use to rip out shoreline. Brenda Calloway stood beside the flatbed in her magenta blazer, clipboard in hand, sunglasses down now against the morning sun, directing the men toward my shoreline like a foreman on a job she owned. "This is association property as of this morning," she called up to me. "We have authorization to clear the frontage. Stay back." "Authorization from who?" I said. "Show me the paper that says you can cut my gate." "The board has voted," she said, as if a vote were a deed. I did not stay back, but I did not go down those steps either. I stood where the camera could see all of it. The gate, the men, the cutters, the flatbed, the woman. And I called Dale Whitman's direct line. And when he picked up, I said 3 words. "They're cutting in." Then I said calmly, loud enough for the phone and the men to hear, that there was an active recorded easement on that shoreline, that the only beneficiary of it was the parcel they were standing on, and that every man who touched my gate was now on video committing destruction of property. The 2 men with the bolt cutters stopped. They looked at each other, then at Brenda. The bigger one said something to her I could not hear and shook his head. Brenda told them to keep going. She said the lawyer had it handled. She said it twice. They cut my chain. The links fell into the frost, and the gate swung open on its own weight with a long, low complaint of the hinge. And in the kitchen window behind me, I saw Nina lift her own phone and start filming from the second angle. The way I had taught her, without my asking, her face pale and steady, and her hand not shaking at all, which frightened me and made me proud in the same breath. The excavator never came off the flatbed. Dale Whitman's cruiser came up the lane with its lights on before they could unstrap it, and a second cruiser behind him. What had been a property dispute the county could barely be bothered with that spring was now, on a Monday morning in September, 2 men with cut chain on a stranger's land and a woman directing a dig on shoreline she had been told was under easement. Dale stepped out, took one slow look at the cut chain, the bolt cutters, the excavator, and Brenda's clipboard, and his whole posture changed. "Everybody stops," he said, "right now." Brenda started in on him about jurisdiction and community standards and the surrender form I had refused to sign. Dale let her talk. When she finished, he asked her one question. Did she have a recorded instrument, anything filed with the county, that gave the association any interest in this parcel or this shoreline? She said the board had discretion. He asked again, did she have anything recorded? She said her husband's attorney had assured her. He asked a third time, very quietly, did she have a single recorded document, yes or no? She did not answer. I want to tell you about the reveal the way it actually happened, because it was not loud. And the quiet is the part that mattered. The real reckoning came 11 days later, on a Thursday evening, at the regular monthly meeting of the Pinecrest Shores Board, held in the clubhouse, because Dale had advised me that the cleanest place to end a thing like this was in front of the body that started it, with the county present. I came in my work clothes, a clean chambray shirt and the same boots, because I was not going to dress up to tell the truth in a room that should have known it all along. Nina came with me and sat in the second row beside Pete Sorensen, who had driven down in his ranch truck and put on a clean shirt and held his hat in his lap the whole night. Deputy Whitman stood at the back in uniform, hat off, arms folded. There were maybe 30 residents in folding chairs. Ordinary people, retirees, and young families. People who had spent 18 months hearing that the man at the north end was a squatter on their lake. And I could feel a few of them watching me the way you watch a problem that walked in the door. Brenda ran the meeting from a long table at the front, flanked by 4 other board members and, at the end of the table, by a man in a sport coat I had not met but recognized from his own financing documents. Greg Calloway. When the floor opened for resident concerns, I stood up, and I asked to address the board's claim to my parcel. Brenda smiled the way you smile at a child who has wandered into the adults' room and told me the board had been more than patient and that she hoped I had brought my signed surrender form. I had not brought a surrender form. I walked to the front, and in the quiet of that room, I laid one sheet of paper flat on the table in front of her, turned so she could read it, and I set my hand flat beside it. And I did not say a word. It was the certified copy of the 1954 recorded easement, county stamp in the corner, the legal description of my parcel, the full northern shoreline burdened for the benefit of my tract and no other. Recorded 30 years before Pinecrest Shores existed and signed by the original platters of the lake. Brenda looked at it. The room was silent. She picked it up, and the first thing that happened was the smile went out of her face. And the second thing that happened was she looked down the table at her husband. And that look told every person in that room more than any speech I could have made. Deputy Whitman walked up from the back. He did not raise his voice. He asked to see the document, and I handed it to him. And he read it the way a man reads something he already trusts. And then he set it back down on the table and looked at Brenda Calloway and said, "This is recorded. This predates your association by half a century. You've been trying to take ground that this man holds the only easement on." He turned to the residents. "Nobody on this board has any authority over that parcel. There is nothing to surrender." Then I gave the room the only numbers that mattered, side by side, so they could feel the gap. In 18 months, the association had issued 61 notices against my parcel and claimed over $22,000 in fines. The number of those notices that were valid was 0, because the easement on my shoreline had been recorded in 1954 and never once challenged, and not $1 of those fines had ever been collected, because not one of them had ever been owed. 61 notices, 0 authority. I let those 2 numbers sit in the air, and then I sat down. What happened after happened fast, the way things fall once the load-bearing piece is pulled. A woman near the front, a board member named Susan Reyes, who had been quiet all night, asked to speak, and her voice shook. She said she had voted for the fines because she had been told the parcel was inside the community and that the surrender was routine. She said she had asked Brenda twice to see the legal description and had been told it was being handled by counsel. She said she wanted it in the minutes that she had asked. Then she did the thing that ended it. She said that 2 weeks earlier, she'd seen a copy of Greg's resort financing on the clubhouse printer, and that the marina on the site plan ran straight along the north shoreline, and that she had not understood what she was looking at until tonight. The defector at the table was not dramatic. She just could not stomach it anymore. And she said so quietly, and the room heard every word. It came apart for the Calloways from there, and it came apart in exactly the shape of what they had tried to do. The resort financing had been written against a site plan that required North Shore frontage Greg did not own and could not get, because the only easement on that shoreline ran to my parcel. When the lender's title company finally did the search that the Calloways had been betting nobody would force, they found the 1954 easement sitting right where it had been sitting for 70 years, and they learned the frontage was encumbered and unobtainable, and the construction loan, with its immovable start date, collapsed under them. The marina could not be built. Without the marina, the unit count did not pencil. The 40 units could not be built. The county incentive, keyed to the same start date, lapsed. Greg Calloway lost the resort, not because I sued him, not because I raised my voice, but because the loan he had borrowed against a piece of shoreline he assumed he could bully out of a widower turned out to rest on a document recorded the year before his own father was born. Brenda resigned the presidency before the next meeting. The board, with Susan Reyes leading it, voted to rescind every notice issued against my parcel and entered into the permanent minutes that the association had never held jurisdiction over the North End tract, the very thing Brenda had refused to put in writing for 18 months. The fake inspector, it turned out, was a cousin of Greg's, and the bolt cutter morning became a misdemeanor destruction of property matter that Brenda settled by paying for a new gate, a heavier chain, and the lock I would have bought anyway. The county attorney looked hard at the fraudulent inspections and the manufactured fines. And while no one went to prison, the Calloways spent the next 2 years answering for it in ways that cost them far more than my shoreline ever would have. And the magnetic sign that said Lake Region Code Enforcement became a small exhibit in a file with a county case number on it. The night it ended, Nina and I drove home up the dark lane, and the new gate was already hung. And she got out without being asked and locked it behind us, the way she had been doing since August. In the kitchen, she put the kettle on, and she took the certified copy of the easement out of my hand and looked at it for a long moment, the county stamp, the old signatures, the year. "Mom would have liked that you kept it in a folder," she said. She would have. Carol used to laugh at my drawers full of dated paper, at the cameras, at the way I logged the day the well was serviced, and the day the dock boards were replaced, and the day the first ice went out each winter. She called it my church, and she did not mean it unkindly. She is the one who told me, the week we signed for this place in 1991, to read the deed all the way to the end before I signed it, because the back pages are where they hide the truth, and the front pages are where they hide the smile. I read it all the way to the end. That is how I knew about the easement before Brenda Calloway knew my name. My wife taught me that. Standing at a closing table 33 years ago with the agent drumming his fingers, and it kept the only place she ever loved in the hands of the daughter she left behind. So here is the lesson, plainly, because I promised you one at the start, and a man should keep his word. Your land is defended by paper, and the paper is only as good as your knowledge of it. A deed in a drawer you have never read is just kindling. Go and find your deed. Read it all the way to the end, the back pages, the legal description, the exceptions, the easements. Drive to your county recorder's office and pull the plat for your parcel and the ones around it. And walk your boundary against what the map actually says, because the pins in the ground and the lines on the paper do not always agree, and you want to be the one who knows where they differ. When a letter comes, do not argue with it. Date it, photograph it, and put it in a folder, and keep the folder. Install the gate, the lock, the camera. Before you think you need them, talk to your neighbors. Because a Pete Sorensen who will sign an affidavit is worth more than any lawyer you can hire after the fact. And he will do it for free and mean it. Authority that will not show you a recorded document does not have one. Make them show you the paper. And if they cannot, you already know how this ends. If you have a story like this, a clipboard that thought it owned your ground, put it in the comments because I read them. And there is always someone there who needs to hear that the deed wins. Subscribe if you want to stay for the next one. And next time, I will tell you about the man 2 coves over who was ordered to tear down the dam his grandfather built. Until the day the association's own engineer read the federal license number stamped into the spillway and went very, very pale. That is the one about the dam. I will see you then.